Hello, my name is Michelle, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. On the podcast today, we have Ann K. Johnson, the owner of So Easy Windows, which is a wholesale workroom in Ohio, which she founded in 1992. When Ann opened her business, there were very few resources for education, and so she had to learn a lot by trial and error. Today, Ann's passion is in educating the modern workroom, and she happily recounts all of her mistakes and frustrations to help workrooms avoid the pitfalls of wasted time and resources. All of her teaching revolves around enhancing efficiency throughout the business to maximize quality and profitability. Ann and I have been friends for years, and on the podcast today, she's going to talk to us about how her business started accidentally. And I think many of us can understand that, and it might even resonate with how ours started. Ann's also going to share with us how staying accidental or not really investing in her business the way maybe she could have from the beginning impacted her profitability and her choices. And she's also going to share with us what changed her mindset to make her realize that this business was where she really wanted to focus her time, her attention, and her financial resources. I hope you enjoy. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Ann, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this too, so very much.
Good. So, Ann, why don't we start by having you share a little bit with our listeners about your business, kind of where you started and where you are today.
Okay, I'm kind of an accidental business. I fell into it. I was a stay-at-home mom and just looking to make a few dollars on the side. And I ran into a girl at a church function who wanted to become an interior designer on her own. And she asked me to sew for her. And I had never sewed window treatments before. And she said, no problem, we'll learn together. This was back in 92, before there was internet and schools and professional patterns. So I learned everything totally on my own by trial and error, pretty much the hard way. Pretty much I would do it all the wrong ways before I finally figured out the right way. And it just kind of grew from there.
And so you are a drapery workroom.
Yes.
And you are primarily to the trade at this point?
Yes, primarily. I have the occasional retail client pop up, but usually they're old clients from way back when I used to do retail. So I'm happy to work with them.
Okay. And when you started, I love the accidental business, and you know my story. Mine was accidental as well. I mean, it wasn't. I had been doing things in my own house and thinking, oh, what could I do on the side? And then someone rang my doorbell and my business began. So I would say it was accidental. I certainly didn't go in with a full-blown business plan, a marketing plan, an ideal client, none of that even though I knew all of that from business school, not one bit of that entered my mind when they rang my doorbell. It was solve the problem, right?
Exactly the same thing. It was, okay, sure, give me some work and I'll do it for you and make a couple bucks. That was all I was thinking.
That's right. How did you come up with your first set of pricing? Did you just kind of talk to your friend and, you know, hey, what are you willing to pay? Let me tell you this. I remember one of the first, I'm going to say, designers who hired me to make something. He asked me, now in hindsight, I cringe when I'm even going to tell you what I did. It was a 90-inch round table skirt that was lined with a madras, oh gosh, almost like a tartan plaid, like a madras plaid. So, you know, the tiny and the wide, and it's a bigger repeat than you think. When you first look at it, you think it's not. So major matching going on. You ready for this? Jumbo sheared cording. I know just that makes you want to like be ill around the outside edge. And at the time, I didn't understand. I mean, I knew that it was going to be, I knew how to match it. I got it matched. I knew how to cut everything out. I knew how to keep it round, but the bias pulls on that round tablecloth because of the way it's cut. And I didn't leave it and sew onto a square and then cut it. I cut it first. I didn't know to leave it open in the center. So I was trying to leave it open on the edge. And then jumbo sheared cording, that is of the devil. That is pure of the devil. I mean, it's just horrible. I don't care how you use it. Now let's use it on a bias on a round tablecloth for the first. And he was willing to pay me $30 for it. I took it. I accepted it because I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I am telling you, I was throwing it on the floor. I was crying. It made me question everything I knew. I felt like an idiot. And by the time it was over, I almost felt like it was blood money. Like, I need to pay you to take this away from me. And so just that, I mean, I keep a picture of it to remind myself of how bad it was at the beginning. But how was yours? I mean, hopefully you didn't have that Madras plaid jumbo sheared welt cord as one of your first projects to make you cry like me.
My very first project I remember was a shower curtain, and she wanted scallops between the grommets, and she wanted, in other words, a contrast like flap that fell to the front, looked like a scallop, so you had to cut it up between.
Right.
I cut it way up. I gave her nice big scallops, and she made me take it back and recut those scallops because I was a little too enthusiastic. It was, I'm sure there were plenty of nightmare treatments over the years. I mean, they still pop up, but I can't even remember what she paid me for that. And I want to say at first, she probably told me what she was going to pay me for jobs. And I would say most definitely that set me up for very low expectations, right from the get-go. Before that, I'd been sewing like crafts. That was how I was trying to make some money and keep busy during the day while the kids were while I had the kids at home. And so this was making a lot more money than selling crafts. So I thought, well, this is cool. I'm making more money, but absolutely no expectations in terms of how much I should be making, how I should be pricing. Didn't even know it was a business, that there was such a thing as a workroom. I was just sewing in my home and helping somebody out. So I have no idea where I came up with pricing early on. Once I started moving away from her and then having to, my very first, my own client was operable pinch pleats on a slider. Pretty darn sure I didn't charge enough for that then either. Plus I was doing my own installs. So, but I didn't know better. I absolutely had no clue.
I remember some of the first drapery panels I made, and I think I charged $25 a width to make them, plus materials. But I had gone out and sourced the fabric, used coupons for the fabric. I mean, I might as well have given them the $25 and just said, let me do it as a charity case, but I didn't know. And I remember coming home and thinking to myself, you know what, that took forget the design piece. I didn't even know how to price for the design piece. I didn't even see myself as designing the soft furnishings. I saw myself as a fabricator of those. And that's just kind of what I had to do to be able to fabricate.
Right.
I didn't separate the two as two income streams, like this is the design piece and this is the fabrication piece. But I do remember thinking, and I was also my installer for a while there, and before I could sweet talk my husband to go install for me. That was like the second iteration. Then I finally started hiring out the installations because I was tired of doing them at night and babysitters or taking up our weekends. I was like, forget it. But I remember thinking the minute I installed them, they were gorgeous, of course. I mean, we do beautiful work. They were gorgeous. And I remember thinking, that $50, I've already spent that 4 times over just getting to this point. And I remember I only charged $25 a width for the very first set of drapes. And they immediately went up to $50 a width because I thought I've got to double it to even make it worth my time. And that was back in 2000, which was actually pretty high at $50 a width back in 2000. But I still wasn't charging design.
I was same way. Okay, when I did start, I don't remember what I was charging per width. My prices were just based on whatever the designer's experience was with other workrooms is what she would pay me. And so when I started doing work for retail, I just sort of carried those prices over. But I had no clue, absolutely no clue. I had no experience with custom or anything. So I didn't know what things were supposed to cost. I was, before that, just sewing crafts for craft shows. And that's a really good way to not make any money. So doing the home decorating stuff was like making a lot of money, to me, is what it seemed like. So I was quite content. And I was also like you, I was doing retail and I was taking books to the client's house and I was helping them figure out what they wanted in terms of design and fabric, though they always had to pick the color because I'm no good at that. But I couldn't charge them for that because I wasn't a designer. That was my thought process. I was just helping them so that I could get a job out of it. And it wasn't until I started in 92 and worked that way for almost 10 years. And it wasn't until probably the early 2000s when I started participating on the forum, maybe heard about Kitty Stein's book, that I began to think about, others would say, no, you need to charge for those consultations. And I would say, no, I'm not a designer. I can't charge for that. But it wasn't until about near 2006 that I said, wait a minute, I am solving their problem. I may not be a designer, but when I come into their house, I help them choose a treatment and help them choose fabric. I am solving their problem. Maybe that is worth something. And I was getting ready to start charging for those initial consults. That's right. I was trying to work up the nerve to do it is more what it, because I was afraid that if I said on the phone, well, it's going to cost you for me to come in, that then I would lose that client. There was that fear of, I took all work that I never said no. And, but in 2006, I never did start charging for them because in 2006, then I closed my workroom for 2 years to work for another workroom. After I came out to a whole different business plan and lineup and attitude about how I approach my business then.
Let's talk about that idea of not charging, especially in a retail workroom setting, because I think this is a huge issue. I think it's getting much better, but I do think it was a huge issue for me and for many others. And so, there used to be this idea that, and still to some degree there is, that designers would not work with workrooms if they weren't exclusively to the trade. And the reason was because if the homeowner could go to the trade and get the same price that the designer would get from working with you, is kind of what we're seeing right now happening with product on the interior design side of things. With the online shopping, where clients can go online to some of these big companies, and I'm trying to be really kind here with the use of some names, but they can go online and they can order almost at the same price, if not less sometimes, than the designers can. And so that's the same thing that the designers were worried about, and rightly so back in the day, but with their subs. All right, so I get that. But on our side of owning the workroom, it wasn't that we were trying, I will say by and large, we weren't trying to undercut the designer. We didn't understand our own value. And
Right.
Because we were saying, I'm not certified as a designer or trained as a designer, I can't charge you for that. However, we were actually doing the work of a window treatment designer, right? Let's narrow down that focus. but we were being the designer on that project. If we were going into the home, helping select the fabric, ordering a fabric, we were doing the same job the designer was doing. And two things. Number one, we needed to be compensated for that. And number two, that's what allowed it to hold value in the industry. Because the more we went in, not trying to undercut the industry, but not understanding, we actually damaged the same industry that was trying to pay us.
And we went in and we said, well, we're making the money on the fabric and the trim and the hardware. So we are making more and being paid as a designer. And instead of looking at it as also being paid for our time.
That's right. And it may be that if we had even been marking up the fabric and the trim, many of us went in and didn't even mark it up. We were selling it as is, or with Joann's with a coupon. I mean, there was just all kinds of crazy going on because of that lack of confidence. I would have been more than happy if we'd have at least sold it at 100% markup and let that cover the time and the material I would have been fine with that. But that's not by and large what we did as a retail industry in the workroom side.
At least I knew enough to mark up whatever I was selling. That I did do. Now, I won't say I marked it up 100%.
20 to 50?
Yeah, 20 to 50. So that's probably not much better than not marking it up at all. But
well, it's better than not marking it up at all. But I guess agreed. And my point to all of this is, as retail workrooms, we didn't know and we didn't feel like we had the permission to charge. I remember even thinking, you may not be paying for my expertise, but by goodness, you're going to pay for my time because I'm leaving two little ones at home. And so now what I go in and try to help, retail, I'm going to say workrooms that sell retail, understand is the fabrication. And Kitty does this great in her book, and we'll make sure we have a link to the book. But Kitty does this of explaining there are two different income streams. Literally, if you are doing retail window treatments, the fabrication part is a wholesale company selling to yourself as a retail designer going in. That way, you're not, if you were at wholesale and retail, you're not competing. They are actually priced the same to the end consumer. And that's what, number one, it helps you make money if you choose that route. But number two, it preserves the design industry who's going out and doing that exact same thing.
That was one of the biggest eye openers out of Kitty's book, was that philosophy that that you should have a wholesale and a retail price list. That if you are selling to a retail person, you need to give them your wholesale prices and then mark it up as if it's retail on labor. And that was like, oh, wow, never thought of that. But I never had problems. None of my designers ever objected to me doing retail. That was never an issue with my designers.
I never had that issue either. I know many have. But I'll say that the reason that I think I didn't have it, and probably you as well, I was number one, we were very transparent with each other. They knew that at times I did both. They couldn't bring me enough work, right? If my wholesale brought enough work that it kept my schedule full, I would have never done retail, but they couldn't. I also made sure I marked up enough when I did retail that it would never undercut the industry, of course, once I got it figured out. And the other thing that I did was I promised my designers I would never compete against them in a retail setting. So for example, if I quoted for them, they always made sure to give me the name and the address. And and a couple of times it happened, they called me retail to come in. And I would say to them, I'm not coming in because I've already quoted for you through ABC Designer. Right. Or let's say I quoted first and then they called the designer, I would always call and rescind my quote. Okay. Because I always followed the designer and not the homeowner, because the designer is going to bring me more work over the long term. It's a relationship I'm building that would be deeper than any one-off retail would ever be. And so by even just having that open and honest conversation, I'll never compete against you in a retail environment. I'll never take your client. If they call me, I'll call you. Just very open, honest boundaries. Mine never worried. And I will say in 16 years, I only had to pull back 2 times because a lot of times the clients that called them were not the same people that called me. The ones that called me just wanted to do a window treatment. The designers wanted to go in and do the whole room. So quite often they would even sometimes send me to their client who just wanted a window treatment because it wasn't worth their time. And then I would go sell retail to them with the, kind of the blessing and the support and the send off from the designer. So it worked really well for me.
Right. Early on, and I would get caught unexpectedly. I'm not good at thinking on my feet initially. I have to kind of mull things over. And so when I would get caught unexpectedly, a couple of times I did, take on a side job that I realized later I shouldn't have, but I learned from that. Also, a couple of years ago, I had a client through a designer, and right off the bat, the client was saying to me, yeah, I don't know what I hired her for. I ended up picking out all the fabrics and stuff. She didn't do anything. So can you do this room for me? And I went back to the designer and I said, here's what she's asking. The designer knew that the woman had been a little difficult anyways. I said, do you want me to take it or not? And if I do, I'll do your markup. And that's how we handled that one, is that I went ahead and did it for the lady. And I marked up the percentage that the designer would have gotten off of it, just sent the money back to her when it was all done. And that worked out pretty good too.
Right. I think the biggest piece, if I could say anything, well, there are a couple of major lessons here. Number one, if we are workrooms doing retail, we need to charge for the retail work we're doing, not undercut the industry and make the money. Right. Number two, if we are a drapery workroom or any subcontractor who does wholesale and retail, having very open communication with the designers and the other professionals that we work with will always be better in the long run. And there are creative ways, legal creative ways to work around it, because sometimes there are truly, I would say, retail clients who don't get it and don't understand and don't see the value. And sometimes there are just some skeezy ones out there. So you got to figure out, there are, right? You just got to figure it out and be open and honest and have the conversations. Every designer that I have worked with to this day, we are still friends. Yes. No matter how things worked out, we're still friends because we made it a point that our communication would be dealt with, and that it's uncomfortable. It's not confrontation, if you will, but it's worth having an uncomfortable discussion to be a profitable discussion later.
Exactly. And if anybody takes anything away from this discussion, is if you are just starting out with wholesale designers, or even if you haven't encountered this in the past, to just really sit down and think through scenarios so that you aren't caught off guard like I was, and so that you figure out ahead of time that if you're approached, this is how you're going to handle it. And you're right. Full disclosure with your designers is always the best way. You just have to be prepared ahead of time if you're like me and you don't think fast on your feet. But
sometimes I do think very fast on my feet. And sometimes that can get me into an equal amount of trouble because I can think really, really fast. I always go back to the movie, You've Got Mail. And Meg Ryan makes the comment that she can't think fast, and Tom Hanks says he can. And he's like, sometimes that's not so good for you. And that's kind of where I am. But I will say, even though I think fast on my feet, and even though I'm a planner, like beyond belief kind of planner, there were still things people asked me that took me off guard because I couldn't believe they had the audacity to ask it. It was, it wasn't abusive to any major degree, but it was just kind of like uncouth. You were just kind of like, you seriously just asked me that, And so and I'm talking homeowners here, but I don't know. I think you can prepare as much as you can prepare, but I would say also don't feel like you have to give an answer in that moment. If you absolutely can't, I think there's a lot of freedom in going, you know what, I'm going to consider that. And then I'll get back to you. And if you know that you need time to really think it through, give yourself the time. Don't feel compelled to answer on the spot when you're asked something that makes you kind of bristle.
Well, I think part of it too is, again, it goes back to a lot of us want to help people.
Right.
goes back to that nurture thing. So somebody asks you for something, even if it's not totally outrageous, like you said, but if they ask you for something, you want to be helpful. And so your first response is maybe not the most politically correct one or whatever, because you're trying to help them. And then later on, you realize, well, I probably shouldn't have agreed to do that. And I think that's where I got tripped up more often than not.
Right. I love what you said, though, but I learned from that. And I think that's key. Okay. Especially when we're coming into this, as you would say, and I'm going to do in air quotes here, an accidental business. It's about sitting down, and we have these accidental situations that come up that we get ourselves into. But when we learn from it and we adjust and we pivot and we change or we write it down, that's what actually gives us the confidence to grow and to move and to change.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I want to zoom forward a little bit now, and you shared that you closed your workroom for a time and went to work in a more commercial setting. Tell us about that and some of the lessons that you learned working in a commercial space, because I know that impacted you when you came back and opened your own workroom again.
Right. So when I was working at home up till that point, I was still working on half a ping pong table. I knew about regular table or about a workroom table, but I kept saying to myself, what if I decide to close the business in a year? In other words, I wasn't committed to this as a business. It was going along quite well, but I still hadn't fully committed. And there were long hours and I was tired, and this job offer came through, and I thought, oh, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I won't have to work Saturdays anymore. I won't have to cut and cover another board. I was like hesitant because I'd been on my own and I knew this was going to cinch my freedom a little bit. But I went ahead and went to work there. And it was an amazing experience. Now, after 2 years, I realized I just wasn't employee material anymore because I kind of rubbed against the restrictions of working under their specifications and stuff. But overall, because of the amount of work that went through that workroom, they had, when I started, they had a young man who did all the cornices, and he did all the hardware prep and cutting and covering boards. And they had 5 sewers, seamstresses. So, and he had a lot of work. He was keeping them busy for those 2 years, and it really hustled. And he was all about efficiency, all about every movement in the workroom. Unfortunately, he was also too much about efficiency, too much about wandering in and saying, no, we need to do this a little bit different. Maybe it'd be faster if you do it this way. Now, mind you, he didn't sew. He only knew the rudiments of it. So he would try to say, do it this way instead of that way. And then the next time they went to do that particular treatment, they didn't know which way to do it.
So trying to be more efficient actually led to confusion that reduced the efficiency.
So that was one of the lessons I learned, is that, yes, efficiency is extremely important because it really rolled the jobs through there. But by the same token, you can freeze up on making things too custom or too efficient. They had the mindset that every single job is totally custom, and so there was no need to write what's the word I want?
Processes,
step-by-step
procedures.
Process, because every job was different, and so was approached totally differently. I was able to prove that different when I hired a young girl who was a little ADD, and she would never have lasted if I hadn't been there, because I kept coaxing her along. And finally, I sat down and wrote down step by step for tabling a panel. And after that, then she followed those steps. And then I started doing the same thing. And as far as I know, they're still using those processes, and they've made, modifications, but they follow that when they hire somebody new, or if they're coming along with something they haven't done in a while. What I learned from that was, number one, efficiency is key. And seeing the efficiency in that workroom, he runs a very neat workroom. It's very well laid out. efficiency plays into all his scheduling because he has his own installers and everything, and in which jobs to go with next and how to process them. I also learned that too much efficiency or not having written processes did cause problems that could be fixed with the written processes. It was just all, and I learned that a workroom table is very important to getting things. So, we left on really good terms after 2 years, and actually worked out best for him because I left at the beginning of 2008, and at that point the economy dove, so he didn't have to pay my salary. He was able, and he took over my job and was able to do. I did all the cutting for all the jobs, and then just oversaw all the fabrication. Is what I did. So he was able to take over that after I left. And at that point, then I came back here and I said, well, I'm going to open up the workroom in my own home, but now I'm going to get some of the tools that I need that I struggled without before. I had a table built. I had a fabric rack built with a light on it. I got a compressor and pneumatic tools, and started out a lot stronger going forward. At the same time is when I started really ramping up the educational wing of my business too.
I love hearing about this because where you didn't maybe invest in yourself and your business at the rate that you should have when you first started, or that you could have. I don't know about should or could, but you know what I mean. This time you came back in thinking, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to fully invest in myself and this business to make it work. And you knew how.
Exactly. I mean, before that, I kept thinking, well, I don't know, am I really going to stay with this or not? Afterwards, when I came out of George's, it was like, it's all I've got. For one thing, it is all I've got at this point, and I need to ramp back up. So I'm going to do it right this time and go ahead and make it a business and go from there.
Excellent. All right. So we know that when you came back in 2008, you invested, you got the better table, you got the tools that you needed to be effective and efficient. I know that you came back in with an idea of those same processes and procedures that you could use in your own business. Because if you've built them and you know them and you've been using them for 2 years, you certainly aren't going to go, well, I don't need them when I move back home. You do need them. So exactly. I know that you brought that back. Were there any other big ahas or ideas that you brought back in when you restarted?
Well, what was nice is, like I said, because of the volume that he handled through there, in your own workroom, you might do a Kingston once every 9 to 18 months, right? And so it's like relearning it every time. Whereas the volume he had going through had Kingstons coming through all the time, which really gives you the opportunity to remember how they're made, to tweak the process, and to just keep practicing it. So I was able to bring a lot of that back home. Plus, George was, he had studied the Curtain Maker's Handbook by Frank Moreland that told how to do a lot of pattern drafting. And he had studied that. And so he had taught me a lot of what they were doing in that book. So I also came home with much stronger pattern drafting skills and fabric handling skills, only because of the volume that went through his workroom that you saw every day, and you could practice it over and over again.
That's what gives you the opportunity to fine tune it all, is exactly. When you have to do anything repetitively. So I always think about it like this. So I'm going to share this for a minute. You and I know, because we've been friends for a long time. I'm a process and procedures gal. I highly recommend it. I always think about it, whether we are a designer or a workroom, that's not, it doesn't matter. There are certain things that we do over and over, and even just paying quarterly taxes, giving money into our 401k, putting money into whatever it is, we have these same things that we do over and over. And so I always think about it as when people ask me how to do that, I get more pushback on the interior design side than I do on the workroom side, because the comment is, but I don't do the same thing all the time. And that's true, but that would be like saying that every panel that comes through the workroom is exactly the same. And that's not true. Even the fabric can make a difference, right? But I think about it and as if you were writing a recipe. And you just shared right before we came on that your daughter is making all these beautiful fresh foods and spices and all that. But if you think about, let's just think about spaghetti for a minute. There are probably 5,000 ways to make spaghetti. But what we really love, I would say as a whole, is to open up a recipe book or see a recipe online. We see a picture of the finished product. We see, here's what needs to go into it. Here are the ingredients, which is our cost of goods, if you will. Potentially, they might say you need a 9x12 baking sheet or whatever. That's our tools and materials that we might need. And then it gives you a step-by-step. Number 1, do this. Number 2, do this. It will even tell you on a really good recipe how long it's going to cook, how long the prep time is, how long it's going to serve, what all of the calories and carbs and all that are. If it can be frozen, if it can be made ahead, it will tell you everything you could possibly want to know about spaghetti, okay? And if there is any weird or strange way of doing anything in the middle, maybe you're making the handmade noodles to go with it, they're going to show you pictures all along the way of all those individual steps. And the reason I'm explaining this with something that we all know like spaghetti is because it's the same way in our workrooms and in our design firms. We are creating a process with the goal that it will come out looking like that every time, right? It doesn't mean the design's the same, but it means that maybe the feeling or the deliverables or something is like that. And so it tells you everything that you need to know. So as much as we kind of rail against it, we also know when we can change up the spaghetti. Oh, they don't like basil. They like a little more thyme. Well, we can adjust those things just like we can in our design firms and in our workrooms. So I just keep wanting people to think about, would you really want to go make a recipe where you didn't really know the ingredients or the ingredients shifted every time, which is what you described. Every time you go in there, I got a different recipe. How do I ever get good at it? How do I ever say, wow, that is the best spaghetti ever? You don't, because every time you turn around, it's something different. And then that leads to chaos and frustration. We don't know where we are in following the recipe. It's just a hot mess. And so I know it sounds kind of silly to think about, but that's really what we're doing in our businesses. We're just going into the pantry and pulling a bunch of random stuff and trying to make something.
In looking at the recipe again, it's the same thing with us, especially if you're working with designers, but also with retail, because most people are coming to you because they've seen your work at somebody else's house. You need that consistency of product. It may be a different fabric, but that whole consistency of which lining you use and that sort of thing is, and how you fabricate does contribute to how your product looks in the end and what they're buying.
So let me say this about that, because it's the replication, being able to replicate. So not just efficiency, but the consistency of replication. Because what if you work with somebody and 3 years later they call you to do the other room in the house? Exactly. You don't want it to look completely different because you're changing methods all the time. You want it to look like the same person, or design firm did every room in the house, not like you just went schizophrenic in every room. I mean, that's not good.
Exactly. When you're first starting out, it's more common to try different methods and that sort of thing. So if much as possible, if you can take notes or even photograph the back of a balance or something, so that when they come back 6 months later and want the same thing in another room. What I tell students is for maximum efficiency throughout your workroom, think about how you would train an employee to do it. And if you have and that's whether or not you're going to ever hire an employee, is if you are building these processes and such as if you're going to hire an employee, then you're feeding yourself, training yourself. But also, if you have plans to expand or hope to expand or unexpectedly have to expand, you've already got it done and ready to go. That's like 90% of the work of hiring an employee. So just in pure thoughts of efficiency, because writing it down also makes you stop and think of the tasks, the steps. And then you start thinking about, why do I do this now? Why can't I do it 2 steps ahead and save a step later? And then also by having it written down, now you're starting to ensure a lot more consistency of product.
I think also what it does is it prepares you if you ever want to sell the company, because the same things that are super important when we're looking to hire or to bring someone in short-term or long-term, that also becomes a very valuable asset of the firm if we choose to sell later. It becomes something that is worthwhile, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let me ask this. You also were able to use all that you learned, not only in your one-person workroom, but in this commercial space where you manage multiples, and build an efficiency course for drapery workrooms. Tell us a little bit about kind of the idea behind that course and who it's suited for. I mean, who can use that type of a course?
Well, it actually spawned a lot of courses. If you're talking about the efficiency course itself, all my courses sort of take into account my pre-2006, all my mistakes. So I can teach you how not to do it, how to do it the one right way. And then all of my post-George classes also incorporate the right way to do it and the efficient and bringing in that efficiency mindset. If you're talking about the efficiency skills class, I've had students who are less than 6 months in the business and students who have 35 years in the business. I've only got 26, and that's really intimidating to have. Or I've had students who are just working out of a little tiny spot in their home, and I've had students who have 6 employees in a warehouse situation. Again, very intimidating to me. I look at them and I say, well, what can I teach you? You're obviously doing it right, because I'm still just working in my own home. But it comes down to a matter of if you've been in business a long time or you have employees or whatever, you get into habits. Also, there's a lot of, every single workroom does this. Somewhere along the line, they had a bad experience, horrible experience. And so now they've tailored their processes for that particular treatment to avoid that experience, which is an incredible waste of time, usually over the long run. So it's also going back and taking a really hard look at how you're doing stuff and throwing an efficiency mindset into it. And the aha moments are just amazing. Even a 35-year veteran walks away shaking their head going, oh my gosh. And what I've learned and what I'm going to do to change my processes or my workroom layout, or pick up this tool that I've always avoided, but now I see the value. And people who are just starting out in business, what I'm hoping to give them is a base to start off on so that they continue forward and don't waste the time that the rest of us did over the years.
I teach my pricing without emotion from the things that I did wrong. I mean, making mistakes and errors, and that is literally one of the best teachers that I believe that we have, if we can let it be a teacher.
Right.
We have to allow it to teach, right?
And
so I know in my pricing without emotion course, even in my profit first teaching and all of that I do, I am amazed at the people that have been in business 30, 40 years that are coming in, that are taking my course the same way, brand new, just starting, all the way up, and taking it 3-4 times and then going, oh my goodness. And I always say to them, if they're a workroom, now go take that efficiency course, because time is money, and I know you do the same, because our courses work so well together, in an industry that needs to understand both sides of it. But I would agree with you. I always hear, where were you 30 something years ago when I was doing this? And I'm always like, I was building software 30 something years ago. But I think that being open to learn, no matter how long we've been in business, 0 years to 40 years plus, and everywhere along the way, if you are learning from a good teacher who's willing to be very transparent, hey, I messed this up. Here are my errors. Here's where I skinned my knees. You're gonna make your own mistakes, but try to learn from mine.
Right.
That's always, I think it's a very genuine and organic way to learn. It's very transparent and open. Those are the teachers I like to listen to. Those are the ones that I like to glean from, because they're sharing, this is what I didn't do right, and this is how I made it right. And I love that.
And they're relating that they're human. You put the teachers on a pedestal and they become more human, and what they've achieved becomes more achievable to you, because it's like, well, they're just like me.
That's right.
Students are often very surprised that, the instructors make mistakes. It's like, well, of course we do, it's all part of the process.
Yeah, I heard on another podcast that I was listening to this morning, just started to get into it, and it made the comment that it's quite often that we look at others who were successful in an industry that we're in, and this is across industry, and we think to ourselves, it must have been easy for them. It's easy for us to think that way. And the truth of the matter is they probably fought just as hard, if not harder, than we're fighting. They just figured something out I'm not saying that there's not the random occasion that it came easy to someone, but most success comes with a heck of a lot of heavy lifting in the background. And I think that being relatable that you just mentioned shows that Anne is successful, but she's messed up. And, she's had a lot of heavy lifting in the background. So if she could do that, I can do that, versus thinking, well, it must have been easier. It came so easier. They got all these breaks. Those are really just excuses to be where we are and to not fight through it, if we're being honest about it.
Right, right.
So, Anne, tell us which books you have, because you're also a really great author in the workroom space. You have a couple swag books, and then you purchased the rights to another. Tell us about those 3 books.
Okay, the swag books, they were generated early on in the Cheryl's forum. I kept answering questions about swags, and I answered the same question over and over. Swags were really popular back then, and they are one of the most, you might say, complicated of any treatments, because you are draping the fabric as opposed to just letting it hang straight. And after a while, I built a website, put up my first website to show off pictures of what I did, and put out just outlines of articles on how to do swags. And they received such strong positive feedback. I was like, well, maybe I've got something here. So I turned it into the first book, the Professional Workroom Handbook of Swags, Volume 1, which was just the basics and teaches you how to do a pole mount swag, a basic board mount swag, and scarf swags. And I guess that was it. It's been so long, I forget. But and then that generated such good positive response that about 3 years later, I brought out Swags Volume 2, and that one covers your Austrian swags and box swags, arch swags, and then asymmetrical, everything else. And honestly, now I could go back and revise those books. I mean, that was back in 2003 and 2005 or 6 that I published those. And it's time to add revisions, because I've got some really great techniques now for handling super large swags, and oversized and that sort of thing. So I need to get busy maybe and revise those. But I have other books in my head that I want to get out first. I bought the rights, but those swag books they are timeless. But the way that I've set it up, the way I've described how to draft, and they're about drafting your patterns. It's patterns. There's a little bit in there about putting the swag together, but it's all about drafting the patterns and how to pin it up and how to troubleshoot. That's key. That's especially in the first. But it also, there's no limitations as to the size of swag. I've gone to a stage company in your backyard, Atlanta, and taught them how to make swag patterns for swags that are 15 foot long by 30 foot wide for stages. So that's the basic. These books are timeless. The workrooms throughout the ages should be able to pick this up and be able to define the specifications for the finished swag, and then just go ahead and cut the pattern for that and drape it. It's math So it's always consistent, but it's not hard math. It's it's not
It's
hard math.
geometry.
It's not even that. It's addition and subtraction.
Yeah, but it's still geometry when you're looking at the shapes and all. I mean, when you really understand it, I'm not saying people have to come in thinking I'm going to learn geometry, but it is geometrical math.
Right. And the part that gets complicated, I just give you a chart to look up your numbers.
That's right.
And then I forget what year it was. I think it was around 2008 or so. Kitty Stein approached me and said she wanted to retire, and was I interested in taking over the rights to her book, Price Your Work with Confidence. And I knew how popular that book was in the industry. Kitty and I had been friends for years, and I was very honored that she would trust me with that book. And I said, sure, I'll take it, no problem. I never told her until recently, though, that I had never read the book. I thought I knew everything, and I'm not, I'm not proud to say that, I was pretty stupid about pricing for years and years, and refused to look at what was in front of me. But I took the book on, and I just updated some resources, and it was about all. That book is so complete and so perfect the way it is. Then all I did was republished it in a larger format, in a spiral bound, so that's easier to copy the work pages at the back to fill out and to follow, through the book. And I think the best part, going through that book and taking your pricing class is what finally made me wake up to how to do my pricing. Your Profit First push at me was awesome, because I set up the profit and the tax accounts, and now I have money when I need it to pay taxes. It's awesome. And I've got money in the profit account if I want to go play somewhere. All I do is go look at that. But what comes through Kitty's book so strongly is her love of everybody in the industry, and her wish for you to be profitable. And she just pours that out into this book. And because of her experience, everything she talks about of the person who won't pay attention was me, doing it all the wrong ways. So she really nailed it as to who I was. She really talks to the workroom and the designers in that book. But again, people have used it to help other contractors, given it to other contractors, because the philosophy, the basic philosophy is the same, no matter whether you're a workroom or a painter or a wallpaper, person or
right.
contractor. So I was really, and then when I republished, the book kind of took off again. It helped that you were teaching it and everything. And so it's still probably one of the more popular books in the industry.
And so are you considering, I know you said more books in your head, and I know you and I've had private discussions about that. Is that part of your long-term profitability strategy for your company, is to be able to develop more books?
Yes. Well, I'm 61 now, and I've been working in the workroom for 7 years. And honestly, at that point, that part of it is kind of boring, at least to do 40 hours a week and nothing else. That gets boring. So the ability to go out and teach is awesome. And it gets me out of there. And then after I've taught for a while, it's nice to go back in the workroom and freshen up my skills. You have to do both if you're teaching, because you can't let the skills go. You become obsolete very, very quickly. But I do want to build, I forget what the term is, income for after I retire.
Passive income. Leveraged. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's part of it. That's very definitely part of it, is to create some passive income. But also, because there is so much in my head, and the classes that I teach in pattern drafting and efficiency in fabrication are so valuable. I want to put these in books. I want to get this information down and in books. And I'm also working with Janelle through the Workroom channel to create online classes. And Janelle's funny. I'm never quite sure if she's saying it out of frustration or what, but she always says, well, Anne's very thorough. And but I am, because I think one of my the reason I am so good at teaching is that I don't just say, this is how you do it. I say, this is how you do it because this is why it works. This is, I give the reason behind it, and I give the pros and cons of different methods. And then that allows you to understand where I'm coming from, to eliminate false steps, and to maybe give you educated, so that you can do an educated guess or an educated decision as to which direction you're going to proceed on a fabrication project or something.
So you give us the ability to change the recipe.
Exactly. I try to give you as many of the options as I can. And there you can just like get into, the whole universe. That's where I have to pull back sometimes, but I try, it's like in the swag books, I give you the basics as much as possible, as well-rounded as possible, so that you can take those books. And honestly, over the years, if people have had negative reactions to those swag books, they've never told me. So I don't know that. Or if it hasn't worked for them, they've never told me, which I wouldn't mind hearing, if there was something about it that didn't work for them. You learn from that too, going forward. But because, and I haven't had a lot of questions about those swag books. You expect to put out a book like that, and to have a lot of people like writing you or calling you and saying, well, I got this far, now explain to me what you mean about that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you expect that. That's part of the process. I haven't had that. So to me, that means that they were well written enough to answer all questions. That's what I try to be when I write a book, when I build a class. It's to give you everything you need to be as clear and concise as possible, but to give you the ability to make educated decisions going forward.
So, Anne, you've learned a lot of lessons. You've been in business for a long time. What are one or two things that you would share with other businesses to help them avoid some of the errors or mistakes that you've made that we haven't already maybe covered today?
Well, we're talking to the choir here in that, getting education, staying online, following the Curtains and Soft Furnishings Library with all of their educational resources available, Facebook, your podcasts. It comes down to education. And you had asked me that question in your list of questions, and I was just looking at that this morning, and I really kind of thought about it. And what was most valuable to me was any discussions or classes that I've attended, and between you, primarily the ones you are primarily the ones teaching these things, is doing something like your why, figuring out your why, putting down your value system, laying out your goals for the future, where you want to be, who you want to be, and why. And then looking at that in terms of your funnel, all of that has helped me in so many ways to be much better at starting to focus what I need to do and how I need to get where I need to get. Now, I keep running up against still having to go downstairs and work in the workroom, which gets very busy and kind of pushes everything else aside a lot. It's understanding yourself and why you're in the business and where you want to go from here really helps you make the best decisions overall. And then getting the training for whether through Workroom Tech, Susan Woodcott's Workroom Tech, going and figuring out where you're weak and going there and taking those classes, or taking the online classes through the Workroom channel, or doing even private training. That I do private training, but there's you've got other instructors around the industry who do private training. Education. I mean, that's what it comes down to. But initially, defining who you are and what your value system is, and then that is what helps you move forward.
It makes me think in my mind as you're speaking, we started off our conversation with the accidental business. And I literally made a note, the accidental business that's no longer accidental. Because what you're saying, of course, is what I teach daily. Find your why, understand your values, understand your strengths, know your mission, your vision, know who you are, then go build and figure out what you're going to do and hang out. But know who you are. And that's what makes it no longer accidental. It makes it by design, by choice, right?
It only took me 26 years to get here, though. So that's what we need to, people starting out earlier, they need to avoid all that wasted time and resources getting to this point. Yeah.
Agreed. Sometimes we focus so much on our craft, right? The sewing, the designing, the upholstering, whatever it is we're doing, but we miss that understanding of who we are and what we're bringing to the table. And that's what fits into our pricing and our packages and our ideal client. And we miss all of that and not to say the other's not important, right. But at some point we need to understand how to turn the oven on. We need to understand if we're a baker. I mean, you know what I'm saying? We really have to understand who we are and what we're doing.
You get on this treadmill of work and you're making yourself ragged, trying to keep up because you're good at what you do and maybe your prices aren't where they need to be. So everybody takes advantage of that. And you're just going and going. And it's like, I know that I need to step back and I need to go get better education or something. But boy, how many people say to me, I want to take a class, but I'm just too busy right now. Those are the ones who should be taking the class. It comes down to, as a business owner, and I know how hard this is to do, especially if you're not pricing yourself properly, is give yourself permission to step back, to walk away for a week and go to a conference or a class, or take that money and call a business coach or get private training or whatever. That's the hardest thing to do, is to make yourself stop that treadmill and get off for a short period of time, even to sit down and figure out your why and your values, because at this point you're just running.
Yes.
And if I honestly, in all complete honesty, if I back in early 2000, I joined a local networking group, and that was awesome. And I really got to know a lot through them. And George, who eventually hired me for those 2 years, has always hosted those meetings. Most generous man with his knowledge. But if I hadn't written the first swag book and knew that I needed to get out in the industry and promote it, I would never I don't know when or if I would have ever gone to a conference. But I went in 2003 in Greenville the first time because I knew the book was coming out the following year and I wanted to propose a class on it. And don't even ask me how I was savvy enough to figure that out. I just knew that that's what I needed to do. So I went to my first conference in 2003 only to study it, to see what's involved, so that I could then bring a proposal of a class the next year. Now, I haven't missed a year since then of going to conferences and stuff and still attending classes. They are, if you do nothing else, you've got to attend a conference, the CWC.
It's the same for going to market. You have to go and put yourself out there with some of these things, whether it's, again, design, workroom, upholstery, but finding a way where other people can connect. It makes you part of something larger than yourself. So education, I'm going to support that.
And you know all that, you hear all that, but you're not charging enough and you're on that treadmill and you're so busy. You got young kids. You just can't see how you could ever pull yourself away for a week to go to a conference. And this is where you have to give yourself permission to walk away, because you do it once, and when you come back so re-energized, then you realize the true value of that. But until you actually experience it, it's so hard to give yourself permission to do that. And that's what I would say, if you're starting out and you're on that treadmill right now, or even if you haven't gotten on that treadmill, but you keep saying, I'm not making enough money, you still need to figure out a way to go.
Absolutely.
Good.
Anne, thank you so much for talking to me today. Can you tell us where people can find you? What's the best place to find you online?
Okay, I have a website, soeasywindows.com, though it's out of date. I can't update it anymore, so I'm launching a new one under nkjohnson.com. That one is, I'm not advertising to be a workroom anymore. The NK Johnson is all about training an instructor. Educating the modern workroom is my tagline. I'm also on Facebook under So Easy Windows, and I am on Instagram under, I believe AKJ Workroom under Instagram. I need to learn to update that a little bit more often. But yeah, you can find me in those places.
Excellent. Well, I will have all of that in the show notes. And I just want to thank you again for your time, for sharing lessons learned, and just an idea of how we can all use that, and particularly education, to be more profitable in our business.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be on your podcast. I've been listening to your other ones, and they're all excellent. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my experience.
Well, we appreciate it too. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I really enjoyed our time together today with Ann and talking about starting as an accidental business and then making business not so accidental, maybe a little more intentional. I was so thankful that she shared about efficiency and consistency and then the importance of education. If you would like to connect with me in some way, I would love if you would go to scarletthreadconsulting.com/PIAC, short for Profit is a Choice. And I would love to be able to connect with you, help you, and guide you as you look for your own education on your journey to make your business not so accidental.